This is Revelation chapter 20, verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. I want to say all praise Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, a great millstone, and shalom to all the Akim laboring in the work, pushing out this truth. All right, I just want to do a short lesson going over this video that Putin did. He does his annual press conference. This was Thursday. Today is Friday. Today is Saturday. Slakia, so-called Christmas. He did his annual press conference, and one of the highlights of that press conference was, of course, the tensions that are brewing between America and NATO and Russia. You know, with NATO and America, you know, moving further east, building up their military stronghold pretty much around Russia. And he made a comment, and it's really what sparked me to do this lesson. He said they deceived us. They've just blatantly deceived us. And I immediately thought about, you know, this scripture, because let's go through the scripture. This is Revelation chapter 20, verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. Now that 1,000 years is talking about this spiritual seal that the Most High put on Esau, Edom, after the fall of the Roman Empire, and during what they call the Dark Ages. You know, after that 1,000 year seal was complete, you had what is called the rebirth, or the Renaissance, and it literally means the rebirth. And this is when Esau, Edom went out to, you know, colonize and deceive the world from that time up until this very time. So when you go to verse 8, it says, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog. It's talking about everything they've done since the rebirth up until this time has been deceiving the nations and been preparing the nations for war. And Gog and Magog is referring to Russia. We finish the verse out, to gather them together to battle. This is World War III. This is the third woe. This is the battle of Armageddon. It's going to take place in the valley of Jehoshaphat, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. So we're going to look at the video, get a few scriptures, and there's some articles I want to read, just highlighting or, you know, bringing some edification on some of the things that Putin's going to mention. All right, so lock you. All right, so here's the comment. They cheated. They just blatantly deceived us. And what he's talking about is, you had, you know, after World War II, you know, Germany was split. You had East and West. The Russians pretty much had control over the East, and it was America, I think Britain and France, that had control over the West. And, you know, they wanted to negotiate, you know, the reunification of Germany and eventually the membership into NATO. And part of the deal for Russia, you know, to comply or to agree with it was, okay, they would release it, you know, to the so-called allied nations. And, you know, NATO would not extend eastward, you know. So that was one of the main talking points that to facilitate that agreement. So what Putin is mentioning here is, you know, since that time, you know, America and NATO has been doing nothing but, you know, gathering more nations and expanding further eastward. He's like, y'all lied. And, you know, don't get me wrong, these Russians are Edomites as well. You know, they're going to be destroyed too, but they're not part of the beast system. You know, the Most High is going to use Gog and Magog, the land of the Medes, the Russians, to destroy America, Babylon the Great, along with all the allies that America has. So, you know, and that's pretty much, you know, what's going on in the world right now. But you can see Putin is not playing. You know, he's recognizing that these are some liars, they some cheaters, they don't keep their covenants, and that's pretty much what he's talking about right here. So let's go to the beginning of the video.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm afraid it's in English. You have talked a lot about security guarantees, and now we've seen your proposals. You also say you have no intention of invading Ukraine. So will you guarantee unconditionally that you will not invade Ukraine or any other sovereign country, or does that depend on how negotiations go? And another question, what is it, do you think, that the West does not understand about Russia or about your intentions? Thank you.
Значит, по поводу гарантий и что будет от чего зависеть, будет ли что-то зависеть от хода переговоров. Наши действия будут зависеть не от хода переговоров, а от безусловного обеспечения безопасности России сегодня и на историческую перспективу. В этой связи мы ясно и четко дали понять, что дальнейшее движение НАТО на восток неприемлемо. Ну чего здесь непонятного? Мы что ли ставим ракеты рядом с границами Соединенных Штатов? Нет. Это же Соединенные Штаты своими ракетами пришли к нашему дому. На пороге нашего дома находятся уже. Ну разве это какое-то избыточное требование? Не ставить больше никаких...
I'm gonna pause it right here because he's making a great point. You know, is this some kind of excessive demand not to put any more offensive systems in front of our houses? You know, NATO was supposedly created, you know, as a defense, you know, from the resurgence, I'm probably mispronouncing that word, of Germany, and also against any future threats that the Soviet Union might possess. So that was a defense. This is supposed to be a defensive organization. But what Putin is saying, you know, y'all expanding further eastward with offensive weapons. So who are these offensive weapons for? And it's clearly to deter Russia, not to deter, but to eventually build some type of stronghold where they can, you know, so-called bully Russia. But Russia is in a position as of right now, you know, and they're going to stay in this position because it's the Most High's will, that they are willing to go to war, all out war, and it'll be catastrophic for both sides. Another thing he mentioned is what the reporter was asking, you know, can they give any guarantees? And he made the statement that he's not interested. He's going to reiterate this later. He's not interested in the course of negotiations. What he's looking for is the results. And what he's saying is, we're not trying to negotiate with these heads of states for months or years, because we're not stupid, you know, because all the while during this negotiation time, what they're going to be doing is further building up, you know, their military, building up their strategic systems. So when there is a final so-called negotiation, you know, pretty much the bargaining power will be with the power, you know, the people who have the power, the nations that have the power, which will be America and NATO. So he's saying we're not interested in that. You know, we want the results, and the result is what we demand: no more further movement of NATO eastward, as well as quit bringing these countries into NATO, you know, and they're prepared to go to war. So that's I just wanted to highlight that. So let's continue.
Таких ударных систем у нашего дома. Ну чего здесь необычного? Вот как американцы бы отнеслись, если мы взяли там на границе между Канадой и США или на границе Мексики и США, поставили бы наши ракеты. А что, разве у Мексики и у США не было никогда территориальных вопросов? А Калифорния кому принадлежала раньше? А Техас? Подзабыли, что ли? Ну ладно, все затихло. Никто не вспоминает про это, так как вспоминают сегодня про Крым. Замечательно. Но и мы стараемся не вспоминать о том, что как Украина-то складывалась. Кто ее создал-то? Ленин Владимир Ильич, когда создавал Советский Союз. Договор 22 года союзный и 24 год Конституции. Правда, после его смерти, но по его принципам создан. Значит, вопрос в безопасности. Но сейчас, бог с ней, с историей. Вопрос в обеспечении безопасности. Поэтому нам важен не ход переговоров, нам важен результат. Разве мы не знаем? Я же много раз уже об этом сказал. И вы наверняка знаете хорошо. Ни одного дюйма.
And this is what he's referring to. Not a single inch to the east. They told us this. They told us in the 90s. And, that's, going right after, I think the Berlin Wall fell in 1988. And then in 1990 was pretty much when they came to the agreement, to reunify Germany. So that's what he's speaking about.
На восток, сказали нам в 90-е годы. Ну и чего? Надули.
And what happened? They cheated. They just blatantly deceived us. So let's go right back to Revelation chapter 20. I'm just gonna read the verse, because these things need to sink in. These scriptures, they're telling events on a worldwide stage, and you can see it play out in the world. Just go back and read that. This is Revelation chapter 20 verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are expired, that's the dark ages, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. That's the Renaissance. And the Renaissance goes right into the age of discovery or European expansion, is when they start going out, to these other nations. And right during the age of expansion or age of discovery, because you had European expansion, which is the age of discovery. Then you had, following that, you had the Enlightenment period. It's when these Edomites start pushing all their false religions and philosophies, whether it was democracy, communism, atheism, feminism, liberalism, all the isms. They start pushing out that madness and poison into the earth. Verse 8, and shall go out to deceive the nations. And they did deceive the nations, one by portraying themselves to be the the people of the Most High, painting all the images over, which is what you get iconoclasm from, and preaching their version of the scriptures, setting up different trading outposts in these different nations, and then eventually taking over the nations or dictating their own governments and installing their own governments, and eventually to what you see today, which is the revised Roman Empire, where it is America, NATO, and the EU that pretty much sets the policies for the world. That's what you see. And again, I have to keep making this mention. Those Russians are Edomites as well. The land of Gog and Magog, that land is originally, those names originally go back to Japhet. But as you know, Esau, Edom, they move into these other lands, take over these lands, get rid of the people, and then they set themselves up. So, but this is a future prophecy referring to the inhabitants of that landmass. And Russia is not part of the beast system, even though they are Edomites. And as Yahushua said, a kingdom divided amongst itself, or a kingdom divided against itself, shall not stand. So that's on a micro level, and it's also on a macro level. On a macro level, it's Esau versus Esau, America, NATO, and the EU versus the Russians. On a micro level, is what you see here in America: Democrats versus the Republicans, the Max versus the Unmax, different races and stuff. So that's what that's talking about. Verse 8 again, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog. Because this deception that these countries have been using to manipulate these other countries, it's reached a point where it has reached the borders of a country that can actually stand up to them. And a country that is prophesied to take America, Babylon the Great down. Let me finish the verse out. To gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. So These devils went out deceiving. They cheated. They just blatantly deceived us.
И просто нагло обманули. 5 волн расширения НАТО. И теперь уже, пожалуйста, в Румынии, сейчас в Польше появляются соответствующие системы. Вот о чем речь. Ну поймите же вы в конце концов. Не мы кому-то угрожаем. Мы что ли пришли туда, к границам США? Или к границам Великобритании, или куда? К нам пришли. И теперь еще говорят, нет, теперь и Украина будет в НАТО. Значит, и там будут системы. Или, бог с ним, не в НАТО, а на двусторонней основе будут. Базы и ударные системы вооружений. Ну вот о чем идет речь. А вы требуете от меня каких-то гарантий. Вы должны нам дать гарантии. Вы. И немедленно.
And he's saying, you must give us a guarantee. You. They're speaking about America and NATO. And this is immediately now. And he's saying now because he's not interested in those negotiations. You need to stop, or we are prepared to go to war. So I think I did this lesson Thursday night. I think either Wednesday or Tuesday, the generals of Russia had a meeting. There was also publicized, and they were basically saying the same thing. They're prepared to go to war, at all costs. A lot of these countries, first of all, they know they can't, really compete with America's firepower. Like even China. If China was to go to war, it would be, it would be devastating for both sides, but there would be a clear victor, and it would be the United States. China wouldn't be able to, impact the same amount of damage that America would be able to. Again, not to say that it wouldn't be catastrophic and disastrous for both sides, but this is different with Russia. Because they can they have the capability to destroy it. That's why you have the term mutually assured destruction. They have the capability to destroy America and those EU countries, and they're prepared for it. This is why he said we need a guarantee now, immediately. We ain't worried about these negotiations. We ain't doing that little game that y'all do. So
сейчас, а не забалтывать это десятилетиями. И под такой вот мягкий говорок о необходимости обеспечения безопасности для всех делать то, что планируют. Ну вот о чем речь. Ну разве мы угрожаем кому-то? Значит, теперь вторая эта часть у вас какая? Повторите.
What is it that you think that the West does not understand about Russia or about your intentions?
Ну, знаете что? Что понимает, что не понимает. Мы иногда, кажется, в разном мире живем. Вот я вам сейчас сказал очевидные вещи. Ну как это можно не понимать? Сказали, не будем расширяться, и расширяются. Сказали, будет равные гарантии для всех по ряду международных соглашений. А этой равной безопасности не происходит. Вот смотрите, еще в 1918 году один из помощников...
I'm gonna just make a quick point right here. He mentioned that he's mentioning Woodrow Wilson. Now, a lot of people may not know this, but Russia was in World War I, and it was allied with England and with France. So in 1917, you had this what's called the Russian Revolution. This is when the communist, regime built up enough followers and support and strength to overthrow the government at that time, which was a monarchy, dealing with kings, ruling for years, and then their heirs ruling. So they overthrew that and instilled a communist government. The actual war, again, this happened in 1917. There was still some fighting going on within Russia. So when this government was installed, they withdrew from the war. They signed a treaty saying they withdraw from the war, and they made peace with Germany, because that's what World War I was. It was against Germany and their allies. So, and that was officially in 1918. Woodrow Wilson, he sent troops to Russia. He had troops into Russia, but it was under the guise of trying to protect military caches that were in Russia, or military outposts or military strongholds that were in Russia during the time that they were allied with the Allied forces, with England and France. That was the guise. But what he was really doing was sending troops to help. Now this part I may be quoting it wrong. So you had two factions in Russia during the time of the revolution. The monarchy was overthrown, so they didn't want that. But then you had the Communist Party. They were known as the Reds. That's where you get Red Russia from. But you had another party known as the Whites, and they were trying to implement a so-called democratic type government. And Woodrow Wilson sent troops, American troops, they don't talk about it this much, into Russia, again, under the guise of protecting those military outposts. But they were secretly trying to help the whites establish a democratic government, but making it seem as if, they're just trying to, protect those outposts to keep, the Axis powers at that time from, getting any type of strongholds. And he's going to mention the fact that, President Woodrow Wilson stated, now I don't know this for a fact, I couldn't find this exact quote, that Russia was too big and they needed to break it up. Now, today in modern times, it's the same idea. Reason being, Russia is a very, very large landmass, and they have a whole lot of people. I think maybe 126, 130 million people. That's a whole lot of people that is not under the control or direct influence of America and NATO and the EU, which is the revised Roman Empire. It's also a very powerful country, a country that is able to, inflict just as much damage as, NATO and the EU can inflict on them. It can do just as much damage. So the idea was to break up this country, because a direct war, it would lead to World War III. It would be mutually assured destruction. So they've been, progressively trying to do little things to break up Russia or destabilize it. But again, it's so powerful and it's so vast, it's been hard. But he's going to make a point that Woodrow Wilson said that Russia was too big. It'd be better off it was just a few smaller countries. And that's what America's trying to do right now. That's why they're trying to get all these NATO, all these neighboring countries around Russia to be a part of NATO, so they can set up their military defense or offensive systems. Let me say it that way: military offensive systems in case of a future war, which is going to happen. Again, I just wanted to throw that point out there about Woodrow Wilson sending those troops, because they don't really mention that a lot in history.
Вудро Вильсона, президента Соединенных Штатов, сказал: всему миру будет спокойнее, если на месте сегодняшней огромной России появится государство в Сибири и еще 4 государства в европейской части. В 1991 году мы сами себя разделили на 12, по-моему, частей, да? Но такое впечатление, что нашим партнерам этого мало. Слишком большая Россия, по их мнению, сегодня, потому что сами европейские страны превратились в малые государства. Не в великие империи, а в небольшие государства, 60-80 миллионов человек. Но даже после развала Советского Союза, где у нас только осталось 146 миллионов, и это слишком много.
So Slovakia, 146 million people. So you got to have some vision and understand what's going on in the world. There's an agenda to control all people, and it's going to be hard to control all people when you got 146 million people that you can't control because their country is just as powerful as yours. So this is the whole idea. This is the reason for the back and forth. Again, first and foremost, it's because this is what the Most High is willing. He's willing this to happen. But what Esau's plan is to, how can he get control of the world if he got 46 million people that he can't touch because Russia? And again, that's why I keep mentioning that Russia is not part of the beast system. Again, they're Edomites, and Edomites do what Edomites do, but it's not part of the beast system. So they have to try to find some way to get this control. And as of now, a direct war, hasn't been in the best interest of America and NATO. And now Russia is seeing what's going on, and they are actually prepared to go to war, a direct war, regardless of the consequences.
Мне кажется, только этим можно объяснить такое постоянное давление. Вот 90-е годы, значит, Советский Союз, все сделал для того, чтобы выстроить нормальные отношения с Западом и Соединенными Штатами. Говорил, еще раз повторю, пускай ваши слушатели и зрители там увидят. Я уже не понял, из какого средства массовой информации. Но это не важно. Но на наших объектах ядерного цикла, военного цикла, сидели представители американских служб соответствующих. Ходили туда на работу, на объекты ядерного оружейного комплекса России. Каждый день они жили там. В правительстве России работали советники многочисленные, в том числе кадровые сотрудники ЦРУ. Чего вам еще больше это надо было? Зачем надо было поддерживать террористов на Северном Кавказе и использовать террористические явные организации для попыток развала Российской Федерации? Это же делали. И я, как бывший директор ФСБ, это знаю наверняка. Мы работали там с двойной агентурой, они нам докладывали, какие задачи перед ними ставили западные спецслужбы. Зачем это надо было делать? Наоборот, надо было относиться к России как к возможному союзнику, укреплять его. Нет, все наоборот. Попытка дальнейшего развала. А потом начали расширять НАТО на восток. Естественно, мы же говорили, не надо этого делать. Вы нам обещали не делать. А нам говорят, а где это написано на бумажке? Нету? И все, идите вы подальше. Плевать мы хотели на вашу озабоченность. И так из года в год. И каждый раз мы огрызались, чего-то пытались, воспрепятствовать чему-то. В озабоченности высказывали. Нет. Идите вы.
I want to pause it just to look on her face, because this is what America and NATO do. They give you this look as if they're really, listening to you, but they don't give a damn. I guarantee the point that Putin is making, which will be valid to any reasonable person, she doesn't get it. Because her question is, can you guarantee that you won't invade Ukraine, and Russia guarantee we won't? No, we ain't making no guarantees. You need to quit moving eastward. You need to quit setting up these offensive weapons. But this is America and NATO right here. Give you that look as if they're, considering, your concerns, all the while they're continuing on with their agenda. But I just wanted to make that point.
Со своими озабоченностями. Будем делать то, что считаем нужным. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 волн расширения. Так что в чем нас не понимают? Я не знаю. Вы спросите, что здесь непонятного? Мне кажется, все понятно. Мы хотим обеспечить свою безопасность.
All right, so that was pretty much it on that. What I want to do, I'm not trying to make this long, but I want to get some edification on the creation of NATO, because again, NATO was actually formed to, to be a security against Russia and a future resurgence of Germany. So I got a little article. Just going over the NATO. So NATO stands for, obviously, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was formed in 1949. Now, it was actually introduced in 1948, which interestingly enough is the same year that the state of Israel was so-called born. It's just very interesting how all these things played out during the time frames or during the years that they played out. But I just want to make a quick note about that. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created in 1949 by the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. NATO was the first peacetime military alliance the United States entered into outside of the Western Hemisphere after the destruction of the Second World War. The nations of Europe struggled to rebuild their economies and ensure their security. So after the war, they were trying to rebuild economically and also militarily. The former require a massive influx. When it's saying former, is describing the two. So on the economy front, the former require a massive influx of aid to help the war-torn landscape reestablish industries and produce food. And the latter, the military part, require assurance against resurgent Germany or incursions from the Soviet Union. The United States viewed an economically strong, rearmed, and integrated Europe as vital to the prevention of communist expansion across the continent. So there you have it. It was always the idea of having a rearmed and integrated European nations, but it would be America, pretty much setting the guidelines for this. And I think they're going to actually explain it in here. All right. So the United States viewed an economically strong, rearmed, and integrated Europe as vital to the prevention of communist expansion across the continent. As a result, Secretary of State George Marshall proposed a program of large-scale economic aid to Europe. The resulting European Recovery Program, or Marshall Plan, not only facilitated European economic integration, but promoted the idea of shared interest and cooperation between the United States and Europe. Soviet refusal either to participate in the Marshall Plan or to allow its satellite states in Eastern Europe to accept the economic assistance helped to reinforce the growing division between East and West Europe. So basically, America knew it was going to play out that way. The Soviets were going to, not want to allow that aid, because if they allowed that aid, it would, make those countries, gear more towards, joining that alliance. But also in the same sense, they would be deterred from joining that alliance, because they would be, in fear of Russia, and that fear will also make them subsequently want to join, if that makes any sense. All right, so in 1947 to 1948, a series of events caused the nations of Western Europe to become concerned about their physical and political security, and the United States to become more closely involved with European affairs. The ongoing civil war in Greece, along with tensions in Turkey, led President Harry S. Truman to assert that the United States would provide economic and military aid to both countries, as well as to any other nation struggling against an attempt at subjugation. I'm going to get a scripture right quick, because the Most High and Obadiah mentions that the nations that are at league with thee are going to turn against thee, and these allied powers are going to turn against Babylon the Great, America, Babylon the Great. It also mentions, I'm gonna read it, that those that eat thy bread, that's talking about any military aid or economic aid. Now that's in this time, like Saudi Arabia, just different countries, Japan, all these little countries that America provides aid to, they're going to turn on America as well. But it's important to understand this, how it applies to the EU or NATO, because it is America that allowed those countries to build up by providing that aid and that military security while they were in the process of building up. So let's go get Habakkuk right quick, because you got to get that. This is Habakkuk chapter, this is Obadiah chapter 1 verse 7. Obadiah chapter 1 verse 7. all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. And, we could jump back up to verse 6. It says, how are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? The first and foremost thing is the Most High is putting the Spirit to reveal this man in these last times. And, putting the Spirit on the man, starting with the apostles on down, to give us the understanding. It's the Spirit that gives us the understanding. It's the apostles that bring out the teachings. And we learn and we understand for ourselves. And the prophecy stated that the man of sin would be revealed. And this is the man of sin, Esau, Edom. That's how his things are searched out. And he all these nations that are in league with him, they're going to deceive him and prevail against him. And they that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. Again, you just read it. America helped build, those European nations, economically, and provide that military security for them. Now, let's continue reading, because they're going to mention how. Let's just read. We'll get to it. But I just wanted to make that point. They that eat thy bread. That's any type of economic aid. So let's read this again. The ongoing civil war in Greece, along with tensions in Turkey, led President Harry S. Truman to assert that the United States will provide economic and military aid to both countries, as well as to any other nation struggling against an attempt at subjugation. A Soviet-sponsored coup in Czechoslovakia resulted in a communist government coming to power on the borders of Germany. Attention also focused on elections in Italy, as the Communist Party had made significant gains among Italian voters. Furthermore, events in Germany also caused concern. The occupation and governance of Germany after the war had long been disputed. And in mid-1948, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin chose to test Western resolve by implementing a blockade against West Berlin, which was then under joint U.S., British, and French control, but surrounded by Soviet-controlled East Germany. This Berlin crisis brought the United States and the Soviet Union to the brink of conflict, although a massive airlift to resupply the city for the duration of the blockade helped to prevent an outright confrontation. So basically, again, the Soviets controlled the East. They weren't allowing anything from the West to come in, but and they were on the brink of war, but they were able to do air supplies to those countries, or to that part on the East. These events caused U.S. officials to grow increasingly wary of the possibility that the countries of Western Europe might deal with their security concerns by negotiating with the Soviets. And that's what the whole point was. Because the Soviets were able to do blockades and control that region, those countries would pretty much fall in line with the Soviets. And this was what the Americans did not want to happen, because they wanted to have control over that, or influence over that region. To counter this problem, to counter this possible turn of events, the Truman administration considered the possibility of forming a European alliance. The Truman administration considered the possibility of forming a European-American alliance that would commit the United States to bolstering the security of Western Europe. The Western European countries were willing to consider a collective security solution in response to increasing tensions and security concerns. Representatives of several countries of Western Europe gathered together to create a military alliance. Great Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg signed the Brussels Treaty in March 1948, and this was just pretty much the precursor to the NATO. Their treaty provided collective defense if any one of these nations was attacked. the others were bound to help defend it. At the same time, the Truman administration instituted a peacetime draft, increased military spending, and called upon the historically isolationist Republican Congress to consider a military alliance with Europe. In May of 1948, Republican Senator Arthur H. Vandenberg proposed a resolution suggesting that the president seek a security treaty with Western Europe that would adhere to the United Nations Charter but exist outside the Security Council, where the Soviet Union held veto power. The Vandenberg resolution passed and negotiations began for the North Atlantic Treaty. So this was in 1948. In spite of general agreement on the concept behind the treaty, it took several months to work out the exact terms. The U.S. Congress had embraced the pursuit of the international alliance, but it remained concerned about the wording of the treaty. The nations of Western Europe wanted assurance that the United States would intervene automatically in the event of an attack, but under the U.S. Constitution, the power to declare war rested with Congress. And just some edification on that. Congress is the branch that has the power to declare war. Now, America has not gone to war or declared war since 1942, the end of the World War II. What America works under is something called authorization for use of military force. That allows the president to pretty much engage in war without having to go to Congress to officially declare war. I just want to make that point. And the reason why is the same thing that they're stating here, is because if Congress is deliberating on whether or not to go to war, things can get progressively worse during that time frame. That allows the president to have leeway to go ahead and send troops to war without having to declare war. So this was a concern for these European nations, not the authorization for military use, because I don't know if they understood that or not, but the Congress part, they wanted reassurance that, hey, we want to make sure that you're gonna come to war, or come support us automatically in the event of something happening, not having to wait on Congress to convene and different sessions and then eventually declare war. So I just want to do a little edification on that. All right. Negotiations worked. Let me read that again. The nations of Western Europe wanted assurance that the United States would intervene automatically in the event of an attack, but under the U.S. Constitution, the power to declare war rested with Congress. Negotiations worked toward finding language that would reassure the European states, but not obligate the United States to act in a way that violated its own laws. Additionally, European contributions to collective security will require large-scale military assistance from the United States to help rebuild Western Europe's defense capabilities. While the European nations argued for individual grants and aid, the United States wanted to make aid conditional on regional coordination. So because it was the United States that had the power, had the money, they were going to aid these countries, but it was on coordination, conditional on regional coordination. What does that mean? Allowing us to set up troops, allowing us to set up bases, allowing us to set up defense systems. This is how this came about. It's no different in Japan, South Korea, Arabia, Saudi Arabia, and all these other countries in the world that America has bases and troops in. It's conditional because it's America that's the hammer of the earth, that's pulling all the strings, so to speak. All right, let me read out. Let me see where I left that. All right. While the European nations argued for individual grants and aid, the United States wanted to make aid conditional on regional coordination. A third issue was the question of scope. The Brussels Treaty signatories preferred that membership in the alliance be restricted to the members of that treaty plus the United States. So remember, the original countries that signed the treaty for the Brussels Treaty, They just wanted those countries to be part of it, but America wanted to expand. They're going to mention it. Those countries plus America, but America wanted to expand. All right, let me read that again. The Brussels Treaty signatories prefer that membership in the alliance be restricted to the members of that treaty plus the United States. The U.S. negotiators felt there was more to be gained from enlarging the new treaty to include the countries of the North Atlantic, including Canada, Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Ireland, and Portugal. Together, these countries held territory that formed a bridge between the opposite shores of the Atlantic, which would facilitate military action if it became necessary. So let me read that again. The U.S. negotiators felt there was more to be gained from enlarging the new treaty to include the countries of the North Atlantic. You know, those countries that's surrounding Russia to the north, including Canada, Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Ireland, and Portugal. Salakia for a minute, brothers. All right, Salakia, I just had to check something. All right, so back to the. Let me start back at the top. Well, not at the top, but talking about the signatories. The Brussels Treaty signatories prefer that membership in the alliance be restricted to the members of that treaty plus the United States. The U.S. negotiators felt there was more to be gained from enlarging the new treaty to include the countries of the North Atlantic, including Canada, Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Ireland, and Portugal. Now, in that video, Putin said they're doing what they were going to do, which was move further eastward anyway. That's why you got Ukraine. That's why they trying to get Ukraine. That was just in the news. They were trying to get Belarus in it, but they weren't trying to get Belarus as part of NATO. They were trying to get Belarus to accept so-called military defense systems, but Belarus said, "No, we don't need that." And you got to understand, these Belarus and Ukraine, these were former USSR. They were part of former USSR, which said what the United Soviet Socialist Republic. And like Putin said, they are doing what they were always going to do, what they were planning on doing. And basically America, is never satisfied. They're trying to heap onto themselves all people. Let's get that in Habakkuk 2. This is Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 5. Actually, let's start at 4. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him. That's talking about Esau Edom. He's full of pride. His soul is not right. But the just shall live by his faith. That's talking about, Israel, mainly the elect on this side, because we're living by faith. Verse 5. Yea, also, because he transgresseth with wine. That wine is all the philosophies, all the doctrines, all these crooked agendas, all these crooked deals. It's mainly dealing with the philosophies, but you got to understand this too. During the Enlightenment period, that's when they start pushing all these philosophies out. Even communism is an idea or philosophy, going back to the Enlightenment period. Democracy, all of that. He is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. And that's speaking about Esau Edom, mainly, America, Babylon the Great. Now, this is also talking about the wicked elite, because ultimately it's them that's pulling the strings. It's just America is the front man, or the henchman, the bully, the hit man, basically, because he has all the military might and the prestige, which is, that prestige is dwindling in the world right now. But neither keepeth at home. Here it is, America's on the Western Hemisphere controlling all the events and policies of these nations on the complete other side. But they're able to do that because they have that military power. That they are the hammer of the earth. And what it say? Who enlargeth his desire as hell and as death, because hell is just a grave, and death, they're always open to receive. You know, it can't fill up and cannot be satisfied, but gathered unto him all nations. Now that's saying he's trying to get all nations. That's exactly what he's doing. And heapeth unto him all people. And that's on a greater scale, because that's what's going on in the world right now with the with all these different, I gotta say it like this, all these different variants. You know, and eventually it's gonna go to Revelations 13. Heapeth unto him all people. But they can't get all people without having to go through Russia. You know? So that's what's taking place right now. But that scripture jumped out. Let me go back to the article and see if there's anything else in here that I want to get. Yeah, it ain't that much. I'll read this. President Truman. Oh, this is just a caption of what's going on here. All right, so the result of these extensive negotiations was the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty in 1949. In this agreement, the United States, Canada, Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the United Kingdom agreed to consider attack against one and attack against all, along with consultations about threats and defense matters. So this treaty was actually signed in 1949. But it was introduced in 1948. I just think that's very interesting to make a note of, because a lot of things went down in 1948. This is also why we always tell you, make a point of highlighting, the beast is the EU and NATO. And we have to constantly remind you that America and Canada are a part of NATO, because they are not part of the EU or the European Economic Community. These countries, however, are very similar to the countries that formed the EU, which was started out as the European Economic Community, with the signing of what was called the signing of the Treaty of Rome, which Rome had nothing to do with it, which shows you that this place is nothing but Rome all over again. And when I say this place, I mean like this world governance is pretty much Rome all over again, with these European nations, these Edomite nations, and America pretty much controlling all the policies and the agendas. So I'm going to pull up this picture right quick, this GMS picture, where pretty much has a breakdown, of these countries. So you can see it here. Now I want to focus more so to the right. The 10 horns. The 10 horns represent the common market, or the European Economic Community, which is the EEC, or today is known as the EU, the European Union. Established in 1958. So like today, the EEC is known as the EU, the European Union. And the original 10 countries were Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Greece. Now at 8 you see Spain and Portugal. And at 9 you see England and Ireland. Because if you look up the original countries of the EU, it's going to have 12. But if you look on a map and the history, it's going to list 12, because it's going to have Spain and Portugal as separate, and it's also going to have England and Ireland as separate. But again, those were actually one. They're on one country, or one I say landmass for lack of better words, because it's not a continent. One landmass, and at one point they were under one king. So those are the original 10. And then, going down, it goes into NATO. North Atlantic Treaty Organization was established in August 4th, 1949. consisting of 19 nations, you know. But, you know, we just read the original nations that were included in that. All right, so I just wanted you to get a visual picture of it. You got, you know, the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns is NATO. The 7 heads, 7 governments or kingdoms ruled by Esau. And what you're coming to find out more and more is it's these damn Europeans that the Most High is describing as the devil. And people soon forget that these Americans are Europeans. These Edomites, they're all Edomites. The Russians, they're Edomites. All those Europeans are Edomites, and Americans are Edomites. These are the people who have pretty much infected the world with all of their philosophy. And if you look to the left, you got philosophy, democracy, religion, ideology, idolatry, homosexuality, lies, adultery, covetousness, murder. They've infected the world with this. Like, you've always had wickedness in the world. You know, I don't want to sidetrack too much. You always had wickedness in the world, but these people have went out, deceived the nations, and just flooded the world with it. I just wanted to point that picture out. Alright, so going back, the result of these extensive negotiations was the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty in 1949. In this agreement, the United States, Canada, Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the United Kingdom agreed to consider attack against one and attack against all. Along with consultations about threats and defense matters, this collective defense arrangement only formally applied to attacks against the signatories that occurred in Europe or North America. It did not include conflicts in colonial territories. After the treaty was signed, a number of the signatories made requests to the United States for military aid. You see again the common theme of military aid from the United States, because it's the hammer of the earth. You know, the Most High, you know, made America that way, just like, you know, the Most High raised up Pharaoh and the Egyptians just so he can show his power in them. He can show how mighty he is by bringing them down. And he did the same thing with America. You know, these European nations, but specifically America, Babylon the Great. All right. Later in 1949, President Truman proposed a military assistance program, and the Mutual Defense Assistance Program passed the U.S. Congress in October, appropriating some $1.4 billion for the purpose of building Western European defenses. Soon after the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the outbreak of the Korean War led the members to move quickly to integrate and coordinate their defense forces through a centralized headquarters. The North Korean attack on South Korea was widely viewed at the time to be an example of communist aggression directed by Moscow. So the United States bolstered its troop commitments to Europe to provide assurance against Soviet aggression on the European continent. In 1952, the members agreed to admit Greece and Turkey to NATO, and added the Federal Republic of Germany in 1955. West Germany entry led the Soviet Union to retaliate with its own regional alliance, which took the form of the Warsaw Treaty Organization and included the Soviet satellite states of Eastern Europe as members. The collective defense agreements in NATO served to place the whole of Western Europe under the American nuclear umbrella. You hear that? Read it again. The collective defense agreements of NATO served to place the whole of Western Europe under the American nuclear umbrella. So again, keep in mind, it's these Europeans, these Edomites that the scriptures are describing, America being one of them, these Americans being Europeans, it just so happens that the Most High has designed it a way, because this is his story. He designed it a way where it'd be America that will have all the force and all the power in these latter days. So as we read further up in the paragraph, or further up in the article, America's military aid and economic assistance was conditional on regional coordination. So it was America that had all the bargaining power, so the collective defense arrangement. And again, could you blame them? I mean, I'm not taking any sides on this. I'm just reading history and relating it to prophecy according to the scriptures, because any nation, if they have the power to do so, or are gonna make attempts to solidify their power through various strategic negotiations and so forth. So I mean, that's just part of life, and that's just part of war. But it's clear to see who is who when you read the history. That's the point. It's clear to see who is who. It's clear to see who the scriptures are talking about and who they're identifying. The 10 horns, the whore that's on the beast, what the beast is. It's clear to see. All right, so the collective defense agreements in NATO serve to place the whole of Western Europe under the American nuclear umbrella. In the 1950s, one of the first military doctrines of NATO emerged in the form of massive retaliation, or the idea that if any member was attacked, the United States would respond with a large-scale nuclear attack. The threat of this form of response was meant to serve as a deterrent against Soviet aggression on the continent, although formed in response to the I can't pronounce the word. I ain't gonna even try. Actually, let me look it up. It ain't gonna kill me. Let me see this.
Exigency.
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 All right. Exigency. Although formed in response to the exigency of the developing Cold War, NATO has lasted beyond the end of that conflict, with membership even expanding to include some former Soviet states. It remains the largest peacetime military alliance in the world. See, this is what Putin is talking about. This is what Vladimir Putin was talking about. First of all, it was understandable why NATO was formed. To protect it, to protect those countries, to form a coalition against the possibility of the Soviet Union threatening them or attacking them, or the resurgence of a strong Germany or whatever. But as they mentioned in the last few sentences, that little agreement has lasted way past that war. I'm not saying they should dismantle, as far as from a military standpoint, I wouldn't dismantle either, but that's the point that Putin is talking about. Not only have you lasted this long time, and Putin made the point is that, hey, we've still been cooperating, or trying somewhat to cooperate, but not only have you held on to that, that the idea of this coalition of countries, as a defense against our country, that being Russia, you're continuing to, gain more and more members, even satellite states of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, former Russian territories. So that's the whole point there. So I want to get another article. I'm not going to read all of it. just going over the not 1 inch part that Putin mentioned. Oh yeah. All right. So this was written back in 2016, and this is pretty much highlighting, Russia annexing Crimea and for strategic purposes. And it's kind of going, well, it's not kind of, it is going into that, but it's making the mention that, it's making the point that the world was during this time looking at Russia like, oh, what they doing? They're barbaric. They're just taking countries at will. And the article is making the point, well, maybe it's not Putin that's the bad guy, because, Russia wasn't supposed to be, not Russia, but NATO is further advancing eastward and, trying to set up these strategic points. And Russia is basically saying, hey, if you're not going to honor, the agreement that you made to not further expand east, then we're definitely going to start taking these bordering countries back under our control, and who's going to stop us? Because we have to protect our interests strategically. Who's going to stop us? So that's basically what's going on. So I might read this first paragraph just to give, a little understanding. So Moscow solidified its hold on Crimea in April, outlawing the Tatar legislature that had opposed Russia's annexation of the region since 2014, together with Russian military provocations against NATO forces in and around the Baltic. This move seems to validate the observations of Western analysts who argue that under Vladimir Putin, an increasingly aggressive Russia is determined to dominate its neighbors and menace Europe. And that's all that propaganda. That's why you cannot trust the damn media, man. This propaganda machine that is the media. Oh my goodness, man. Here it is. And again, I'm not taking any sides, but you have to expect war. You have to expect confrontation when you are steadily encroaching on the territories of other nations and building up forces and strongholds and military defense systems around them. See, again, the reason why it's such a big issue with Russia, America and NATO is able to do this with these other small countries and pretty much smother them with intimidation, with the firepower and alliances that they set up. It's intimidation to the point where it'd be ludicrous for those other nations to try to respond militarily, because they'd be wiped out. And of course the spin machine that is the American media would make it seem as if you got these terrorists that bomb this base or bomb these tourists, something like that, and then they have to go to war. They already know how this works. But again, Russia, they have the firepower and will and fortitude, testicular fortitude to go to war. Like we not falling for that shit. So anyway, let me read that again. Together with the Russian military provocations against NATO forces in and around the Baltic, this move seems to validate the observations of Western analysts who argue that under Vladimir Putin, an increasingly aggressive Russia is determined to dominate its neighbors and menace Europe. Leaders in Moscow, however, tell a different story. For them, Russia is the aggrieved party. They claim the United States has failed to uphold a promise that NATO would not expand into Eastern Europe, a deal made during the 1990 negotiations between the West and the Soviet Union over German unification. In this view, Russia is being forced to forestall NATO's eastward march as a matter of self-defense. And what other course of action could Russia take? You know, the West has vigorously protested that no such deal was ever struck. And I think Putin mentioned this because there's nothing that's formally signed, like a treaty, you know, that can be presented to the United Nations, so to speak. But it was pretty much implied or expressed. However, hundreds of memos, meeting minutes, and transcripts from U.S. archives indicate otherwise. Although what the documents reveal isn't enough to make Putin a saint, it suggests that the diagnosis of Russian predation isn't entirely fair. Europe's stability may depend just as much on the West's willingness to reassure Russia about NATO's limits as on deterring Moscow's adventurism. After the Berlin Wall fell, Europe's regional order hinged on the question of whether a reunified Germany would be aligned with the United States and NATO, the Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact, or neither. Policymakers in the George H.W. Bush administration decided in early 1990 that NATO should include the reconstituted German Republic. All right, so the Berlin Wall fell, I think, in 1989. They signed the agreement in 1990. I think they're going to get into this. In early February 1990, U.S. leaders made the Soviets an offer. According to transcripts of meetings in Moscow on February 9th, then Secretary of State James Baker suggested that in exchange for cooperation on Germany, U.S. could make ironclad guarantees that NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward. Less than a week later, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev agreed to begin reunification talks. No formal deal was struck, but from all the evidence, the quid pro quo was clear. This for that. That's what quid pro quo means. Gorbachev acceded to Germany's Western alignment, and the U.S. would limit NATO's expansion. Nevertheless, great powers rarely tie their own hands. Basically, when you got all the power, because during this time, the Soviet Union actually collapsed. You know, Gorbachev actually resigned, and the Soviet Union pretty much, that federation collapsed. The USSR, the same year. So I think right after Gorbachev signed this alliance, he resigned. So it was the United States who had all the power and bargaining chips. So, you know, they got the formal agreement of the reunification part. They got that part to be formal. But as far as the agreeing to not expand, they kind of kept that under the table. That's basically what happened. Nevertheless, great powers rarely tie their own hands. In international memorandums and notes, U.S. policymakers soon realized that ruling out NATO's expansion might not be in the best interest of the United States. It should be crystal clear who the whore that is riding the beast is. It should be clear who the hammer of the earth is. It should be clear who the beast is. The beast is all these European nations. You know, all these European Union nations. And NATO, which includes America. And it's America that's pretty much, it's like a horse. It's driving the reins, controlling the reins, so to speak. And these other nations are going to get tired of that shit. Anyway, U.S. policymakers soon realized that ruling out NATO's expansion might not be in the best interest of the United States. By late February, Bush and his advisors had decided to leave the door open. So that's all I'm going to read on that. I mean, you can go back and read all of this. The point I wanted to get was not 1 inch. Not 1 inch. So I'm going to get a few scriptures and I'm going to pretty much close out. Let's go to Ezekiel 38. So this is Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 1. And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Prophesy what? And say, Thus saith the Lord power, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So even the Most High, he's saying, he's prophesying to Gog and Magog, that land, and he's saying, I'm against thee. But what? But this is how he's against them. Verse 4, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. So the Most High is describing, he's going to put that fighting spirit in these Russians to come to war. And he's describing like he's putting hooks in the jaws of a beast and dragging him. He said, I'm going to bring you back. So he's turning him to go to war. And he's getting him ready. He says, Persia, verse 5, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shields and helmets, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. Verse 7, be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. And the Most High is saying, go ahead, get prepared and prepare for yourself, because the Most High is going to use them to destroy Babylon the Great, along with these other nations and the allies of America, as we read in Obadiah. So we're reading right here that all these countries are going to go to war. Again, it's going to be mutual assured destruction. They're going to be all, it's going to, something's going to happen. We don't know exactly what it is. We just know how it's going to play out. We don't know the specifics of what's going to make these nations actually turn against America, because it's going to be war, and then all of a sudden they're going to turn on America for some reason. But the Most High is saying, go and get prepared, and be a guard for all these other nations. And Russia is a guard. If you're paying attention to what's going on, because if Russia wasn't involved in Iran, America would have took them out, or Israel would have took them out. If Russia wasn't involved in Syria and Turkey, America would have, toppled those governments and set up some so-called democratic puppet regime, in those countries. But the presence of Russia, and that's what makes Russia a threat. One, it's not part of the beast. It's not part of the system. It's not necessarily against like the things that are going on around the world, so to speak, on a larger scale. It's just not part of this beast system. And it's a powerful nation. That's what makes it so threatening. That's why it's such an adversary. And at the end of the day, their intuitions about Russia is correct, because it's prophesied that Russia is going to be the main country to destroy them, and will destroy America. But anyway, I just wanted to make the point that the Most High is setting that old USSR spirit back into Russia. That's why he's went and got Crimea back in 2014. He just went and got it. Said, we ain't stupid. We're not letting you get this. I don't even think they was trying to get. I don't even think that NATO was trying to get that that area, so to speak. But Russia saw it as a strategic point. Vladimir Putin saw it as a strategic point and just said, hey, we finna get it. Who gonna stop us? And now, America's been creeping more and more. Now Russia's like, hey, hold on. Y'all done got too close. We're not negotiating unless the negotiation is we're not going to go any further, and we're going to remove some of these systems that we set up in some of these other countries. So the Most High is putting that spirit back in them. But I want to go and get Isaiah 13 and 17. So this is Isaiah, and I'm going to close it out on this. This is Isaiah chapter 13. We're going to go to 17. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Now, the Medes, just, I'm not going to do nothing extensive or explain it really extensively, but the Medes, that ancient empire, was right below, which was called the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. It was representative of the bear. When you go to Daniel chapter 7, you had ancient Babylon. You had ancient Babylon, which was described as, the lion with wings, and then you had the bear that stood on its side, because one side was big, one side, it leaning on its side represented the Medes and the Persians. So the Medo-Persian Empire is what took down the Babylonian Empire. But ancient Babylon was not destroyed in the way it is described that it's going to be destroyed. In fact, it was not destroyed. It was just pretty much annexed into the Medo-Persian Empire. Darius the Mede, he had, the kings of Babylon and the princes, they were all drunk, and he had them killed. It was a surgical strike. He had them killed, and the kingdom just fell into the hands of Darius the Mede. It wasn't destroyed. None of these other nations went to war. That's why we try to tell you these things are prophetic. It's describing Babylon. It's describing certain events that happened in ancient Babylon, but a lot of these are future or twofold. There's duality when the Most High speaks to His scripture. That's the first thing you need to understand. And one, the Spirit has to be working with you. So there's duality. But as far as that destruction, that refers to a future, destruction. So same thing. These Medes they were represented by the bear. The Medo-Persian Empire is represented by the bear, and that bear lifted up on one side because the Persians was greater. It became a greater empire than the Medes. So everybody knows that bear represents, Russia. Any scholar would know that bear represents Russia. So it's the same idea here. That landmass, these people that not the actual, Medes themselves, but that is representative in the future, that land that would be inhabited by Esau, Edom. And that's why, the Most High is saying, I am against thee, O Gog and Magog. Even though He's saying, prepare yourself for war, but also be prepared, because this Edomite kingdom, these Edomites, they have to be taken out of power. Because again, if Russia, they're still Edomites. If they take down America and NATO, then they just gonna be the Edomite power ruling the world. So they have to be taken down. All right, I just wanted to get some understanding on that. So behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver. So I hope that made sense. The Medo-Persian Empire was represented by the bear in Daniel chapter 7. You go to Revelations 13, the feet of the beast is represented by the bear. Now the bear is not the beast system. It's represented by the feet because it's representing the end. The feet are going to bring about the end. The feet represent the end of a thing. That's the reason why when Esau was born first, Jacob held his feet. That's why in 2nd Ezra 6 it tells you what is it? Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that follow it. The feet represent the end. Alright, so behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Basically, what that's saying is something's going to happen. That spirit of anger and wanting retaliation is going to be so strong. They're not going to be trying to go to no negotiation table. They're not going to want any type of money. They don't want no land. We're not negotiating. It's just going to be war. And you see that spirit in that video with Vladimir Putin. And again, those generals had a meeting. When was this? I think it was Tuesday evening. I can't remember. Verse 18. Their bows shall dash the young man to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare. Now, you know, bows and arrows, you don't dash people to pieces with a bow and an arrow. This is representative, it's parabolic, it's speaking about those ICBMs, those missiles. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It's two things. How did the Most High destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? By fire and brimstone. He had fire coming down from heaven, destroying that place. And it's going to be the same concept with Babylon the Great. It's going to be destroyed with fire coming down from heaven in the form of chariots and in the form of those ICBM nuclear missiles. That's what those bows are. Now, can the Most High throw some actual fireballs in there too? Yeah, if he wants to, he might. But just showing you, ancient Babylon was not destroyed that way. That's just talking about this Babylon. And it's no coincidence, also it's twofold. It's no coincidence that it's liking it to Sodom and Gomorrah. And this place is like Sodom and Gomorrah. That's why they tell you this place is like Egypt, Sodom, and also where the Lord was crucified. And what is that? Revelations 8. Let me just get there right quick. This is Revelation chapter 11 verse 8. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Those dead bodies are talking about Israel. It's talking about you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, because you are spiritually dead. And the reason it's saying you're lying in the street, because you're supposed to bury a dead body. When you bury a dead body, that's symbolic of giving it rest. When you don't bury it, it's not giving it any rest. And you're dead because nobody, well, you got the prophets telling you who you are, but you're not listening. But these governments that know that you're the children of Israel, they're not telling you you're the children. They're not trying to recompensate you as far as reparations. I'm just using that word because we don't want no government reparations. True reparations is going to come when Yahweh shall come back and deliver us, give us the kingdom, and send their asses into captivity. And we're going to be in rulership. That's what true reparations are. But as of now, they have our dead bodies lying in the streets. Now, right now, the Most High is putting His Spirit, poured His Spirit out in these latter days, and have quickened us. This is what Ezekiel chapter 38 is talking about, the valley of the dry bones. He's put the spirit of life in these dry bones. He's put those sinews back together, put flesh on those bones. He's made us alive again. But that's only the elect, those who know the truth, know the name of the Father and His Son, Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai. So He's given us life. But for the most part, 2/3 of our people are still dead. The scriptures tell you those who wander out of understanding will remain in the congregation of the dead. So this is what this is talking about. But, and their dead bodies shall lie in the street of that great city. That great city is America. All these niggas walk around here dead. They don't have any understanding of what's going on. Pants off their ass. Women got pants up their ass. Different color hair. Niggas just effeminate or thugged out and ignorant. Women just whores, or just, and if they ain't whores, just ditzy and all about themselves, just self-absorbed. That's that spiritual death. And this place is called spiritual Sodom. You don't need an explanation for that. And Egypt, do you need an explanation for that? You got the obelisk that's representative of the statue of what is it? The Washington Monument is a damn obelisk. The fucking Sin City in Las Vegas, they got a damn pyramid. I think in Tennessee, you got a place actually called Egypt. On the dollar bill, you got a pyramid. You were in captivity here. You're still in captivity, but you were in hardcore slavery here. Also where our Lord was crucified, because they crossed out the Lord here. He was crucified here. The true image of the Most High and His Son, they crossed that out here and put their image up. Also, you have to understand, Israel and Jerusalem, they are a people before a place. You know, it was us that gave him up for to be crucified. That's why in Acts 2 it tell you, know for assuredly that the house of Israel did crucify the Lord and Savior. That's you. You the one gave him up. Talking about give us Barabbas. Anyway, what was I at? What was I at? Alright, so verse 18. Verse 19. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. You got people, because the physical place of Babylon is in Iraq. You got people living there. The Most High is talking about when this destruction happened, this place is never going to be inhabited again. It's going to be a place only for desert creatures and desert birds. As it's finna mention, it shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there. But wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures. And owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. And the wild beasts of the islands shall cry in their desolate houses, and dragons their pleasant palaces. And in her time is near to come, and her time is near to come, and her days shall not be prolonged. And you all know, Revelations 18 right quick. And I should have closed it right here. I just want to get this. I'm just going to read verses 1 and 2. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So it's just going to be here for desert creatures and evil spirits and devil and desert creatures. All right, so that's pretty much it on that. I just really I didn't even want it to be this long. I wanted it to be like 10 minutes long, just going over the video, but it's all through the spirit. Hopefully the lesson was edifying. I'm gonna say all praise Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and until next time, Shalom.